Were you just sort of sticking your finger in the air and thinking, oh yeah, 5 million I'll solve the problems at these sites?
Keep hearing this phrase "at pace" cover up for the fact that it was catastrophically wrong.
The square meterage of the building, the size and type of gas supply, which you're complaining about now, the size and type of electricity supply you're complaining about now. There are modern...
Yes, I know, crusty old Tory, but what he has to say is very, very eye-opening. Now, this was in the Public Accounts Committee on Monday the 15th of April, where the subject was the Asylum, Accommodation and UK-Rwanda partnership. And the witnesses were Sir Matthew Rycroft, Permanent Secretary for the Home Office, Simon Ridley, Second Permanent Secretary for the Home Office, Dan Hobbs, no, I'm only kidding, Director General Migration and Borders Group for the Home Office, and Joanna Rowland, Director General Customer Service Group, Home Office as well. We will start off with the Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee, Dame Diana Johnson, and she got on to the subject on the costs of the Wethersfield and Skampton asylum centres.
So setting up the sites and refurbishment was expected to cost around £5 million each for Wethersfield and for Skampton. Then if you move across to the latest analysis, it says the setup costs have increased at both sites. Wethersfield is now expected to cost £49 million and Skampton £27 million. I just wonder, how is it you could get the figures so wrong?
It's a very good question. I first want to accept that we did get the figures so wrong. We were operating at pace. This is not...
At pace. Bear those two words in mind, because they do come up a lot.
This is not an excuse, by the way, but just to set out the context of what was happening a year ago. There was a national emergency. There was a sense that we should be doing on this issue what our colleagues during COVID had done in terms of sort of pace of procurement and things like that. So we decided to press on as quickly as we could to increase the stock of total accommodation available to the UK government. And there wasn't other accommodation types available because all of the existing private rental market, even hotels, was already being used. And so we had to act in a novel and therefore in a quite a creative way looking at these sites. So we made an assessment about how much the setup cost would be, which in the case of both of those sites was woefully short. So there was a very significant optimism bias.
Optimism bias?
Well, it's a very significant optimism bias. And there was some...
Did anybody go and actually look at these sites and see what needed to be done to make them fit for asylum seekers to be housed there?
Yes, absolutely.
They did, and they thought 5 million was the correct figure for both.
They did, and they thought 5 million was the right figure for both. One of the things which is different from this sort of thing than, say, buying a house and doing a survey is that there are certain types of survey in this instance that can only be done when you have access to the site and people with the right expertise are able to get and look at, for instance, the very complex...
Right, but these were owned by the UK government?
There were so for instance there were sort of gas and electrical requirements, there were fire requirements which the Home Office was only able to access after our initial
Really? Sorry, you couldn't get the Ministry of Defence to let you have access before then?
Well, it turned out that we needed to get our own people in to look at those costs, and that is one of the reasons why the costs were...
So it's a national emergency, you've just said, and the government was desperately trying to find a way of housing people, and the MOD would not let you onto the site or let you find out what exactly needed to be done. So were you just sort of sticking your finger in the air and thinking, oh yeah, 5 million I'll solve the problems at these sites?
No, we were making a judgment under pressure and at pace. But we went through we went through a due process which involved the Treasury approving it as well. So it wasn't just within the Home Office. And it wasn't a finger in the air. It was an assessment based on what was known at that time and with that amount of time available, which subsequently, you're absolutely right, turned out to be massively under action.
So what was the 49 million at Wethersfield? So what did you actually have to do at Wethersfield?
I mean, Joe might want to come in more detail as she oversees this programme, but I mean, I mentioned some of the things already. We had to look at a very complex gas and electrical setup. We had to increase from MOD standards to higher standards things like the fire resistance of the doors and of the ceilings and so on of some of the accommodation on the sites. We had to do remedial works. We had to remove asbestos. We had to improve security and install CCTV. We had, other unforeseen costs, which, some of which we absolutely should have foreseen, but others which I think in practice it would not have been possible to foresee.
Well, yeah, you'd need security and you'd need CCTV. That's just a given, isn't it?
Exactly. So there's a mix of things there which I think were foreseen and then quite a lot of unforeseen things. But I just go back to the point I was trying to make at the beginning, which is that the government needed to find accommodation that was not previously available. So because we had to increase the total stock of accommodation in order to solve this problem, which is that we were spending too much on hotels.
Okay, but the MOD were obviously not wanting to really provide you with much assistance at that time.
Well, I think there was a reasonable level of cooperation with our MOD
Really?
colleagues. But
Okay.
Well, I have to say, we have looked at, I think our sister committee won't have, we have looked at defence accommodation, and it's not got a good record. It's in pretty poor condition. I wonder what your officials were doing. Did they believe what the MOD told them? Or did they just, as Dame Diane said, did they actually visit some of these? Some of them were in a really poor condition.
They did visit, and that's what led to the judgment that £5 million would be a good estimate for the setup costs.
What were the skills of the officials that visited?
So I think that's key. When we undertook the initial surveys, there were the non-intrusive surveys into the site.
There were surveys. You had
There were
chartered surveyors.
there were pre-due diligence checks. It wasn't that nobody had visited the sites and no surveys were undertaken. It was the more intrusive surveys and detailed surveys that were undertaken post-purchase. And as Sir Matthew says, that's where some of the costs were unforeseen.
Yeah.
However, it is very fair to say that we didn't have the right expertise on the programme at the time.
Okay.
And that's something we have now rectified, and we have recruited some very experienced programme directors as well as now more external advice.
Thank you for that honesty, Ms. Rowland. Dame Diana.
Sorry, I just want to be clear, non-intrusive. Does that mean you stand at the gate and you just kind of look at what's going on in the RAF base? Is that non-intrusive?
So some intrusive surveys actually contain damage to the property. So, for example, tracing asbestos, etc. We undertook that. But as I say, as Sir Matthew has set out, we were working at pace. It was a risk-based decision to do the intrusive surveys once we were on site and in ownership. If we had longer, I think we would have undertaken more surveys before purchase.
Okay.
Well, what did you make of all that then, my friends? Quite illuminating, wasn't it? Then Dame Diana Johnson then moved on to the Bibby Stockholm facility, and whether it's been value for money. But then she moved back onto the facility at Skampton.
Can I just ask about Skampton?
Yes.
This is figure 9. This says approval to proceed granted on the basis of advice in March 23, expected end date for site July 25. Your initial estimate was cost £5 million less than using hotels, and it now says, updates in January, cost 45.1 million more than hotels with site used until March 28. Do you just want to talk us through that?
So, again, this is something which I review quarterly. At the last assessment in January, there was a net present value of plus 23 million, so again, demonstrating that it does represent value for money on the same basis that the NAO have just set out. There's a particular complication in relation to Skampton, which is about the numbers of people on the site. Now, of course, that's true of all of the sites. It's one of the variables that you'll be familiar with. In relation to Skampton, the original plan was to have a very significant number of people on the site, and that actually drove up the per person cost, because the only way to get that number of people on the site was through additional modular accommodation, which was actually costing significantly more per person than a scaled back model. So what the Home Office has recently been discussing with the local authority is a smaller number, still hundreds, but hundreds rather than thousands of people on Skampton, which will actually increase the value for money because it'll decrease the per person cost, unusually.
So that was a mistake to think that you could put thousands of people at RAF Skampton.
I again, in the spirit of what we were discussing previously, if we'd known then what we now know, then clearly we wouldn't have gone ahead the way that we did. But we were operating at pace in response to an emergency, and we were looking for ways to house as safely as possible the maximum number on this site. And it was through further work over the subsequent months that we realised that the modular accommodation in relation to Skampton was driving up the cost, and that therefore we should scale back to a smaller option.
On modular accommodation, I mean, were you competing in the same market as the schools that have got reinforced aerated concrete and have been buying temporary classrooms? Is that the same sort of supplier?
It could well be.
I mean, I don't know about the details of all the different suppliers, but it's a very similar market.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful to know.
And just my last question. You say it was a national emergency. Obviously, the Home Office were using lots of hotel rooms and procuring hotels up and down the land. Ministers had decided, haven't they, that they wanted to get out of hotels for various reasons,
yes.
Cost and perhaps the perception. So it was a national emergency because ministers had decided to change what accommodation should be provided. That was the national emergency, was it? Just to be clear. Well, it wasn't that you'd run out of hotel rooms.
In 2022 and in 2023, there were a record number of people coming across the channel and claiming asylum. One of the things that was of concern to ministers, quite rightly, was the cost of the accommodation, because so much of it was in hotels, as well as the sense that in most communities, hotels are there for reasons other than to house asylum seekers. They're there for tourism or for conferences and so on. So I think it was reasonable for ministers to press officials to accelerate the move out of hotels, and I'm very glad to say that that programme is well on track to meet the targets that the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister have set out.
One option would have been to go after the backlog, wouldn't it? I mean, I know the backlog, certain part of the backlog was being looked at, and more people were being taken on to deal with that. But resources could have been put into just getting rid of the backlog, rather than spending lots of money on large sites, which then proved to, on the whole, not to be value for money.
We've been doing that as well. It's not either or. There's no one single silver bullet here. We are seeking to tackle the complex challenge of this irregular migration, the numbers of people coming in claiming asylum, in lots of different ways. There's the Rwanda partnership, there's partnerships with countries like Albania, there's the work with our colleagues in France and elsewhere, there's the increased number of caseworkers,
yeah.
There's the productivity, because all sorts of different things. So it wasn't one or the other. We were doing both those things and many others at the same time.
We're going to move on now to Ms Barker.
Well, Paula Barker did continue the conversation about this, but it was only brief, and so we'll just go straight into Tim Loughton, who was clearly unimpressed, and clearly so was fellow Tory Sir Bernard Clifton-Brown.
I'm just mystified about this huge mismatch between the estimate and the turnout cost for Skampton. Who was responsible for doing the non-intrusive pre-due diligence checks on that place?
We were doing the due diligence checks under the accommodation programme, which we had an SRO for that programme, and that fell under ultimately my leadership in the department.
So a member of your staff did those checks and made the assessment that 5 million was
sufficient?
So
we used, as is set out, a number of different contractors to support us to do those assessments. We made the best judgment that we could at pace. As Joe has said, since then we have brought a number of additional skills and capabilities into the team to make sure that we do have the sorts of property and facilities management.
Keep hearing this phrase "at pace" cover up for the fact that it was catastrophically wrong. Now, why did the Home Office not look at its existing similar operations? You've been running the Napier Barracks, another MOD site, for 4 years. You faced similar challenges there. Surely you would have learnt some lessons in terms of likely outturn costs against the state of an existing premises, that you've had several years' experience of the pitfalls of it. Why don't you just send somebody to the Napier barracks with some experience of having set that up, and then compare it with Skampton, for example?
So, I mean, we did have people in the department who were responsible and had set up Napier. I mean, as Matthew said, we're not using pace as an excuse. We know that we got those. No, it was part of the context.
Every response has included the term "at pace."
Yeah.
It's part of the context in which we were working. We have also said that we didn't have all the skills that we needed in the team, and we also said that we misjudged those costs, and in hindsight we can see that. And what we have done through the course of the year is continue to develop those sites so that we've got additional accommodation for asylum seekers.
I think the point I'm trying to make, Mr. Ridley, is this was not a first. You had experience of your department having to acquire at pace similar premises, which you have been running for several years, which would have given you a fair idea of the costs of setting it up, converting it, and making it run. And yet you're treating Skampton as if it was a complete first, and therefore that explains why you're catastrophically wrong on the estimates. So it gives me no confidence that when you find an equivalent of Skampton that you have to do an at-pace assessment in the future, you're not going to make the same mistakes because you actually haven't looked at your experience of running existing comparable units. Why did this go so wrong? And are the people responsible for that still working in your team?
So, I mean, the issues we're talking about are not about running the sites. They're about the initial identification of the issues to set it up.
Yeah.
We absolutely have learnt from the running of Napier and the running of other sites and the running of Wethersfield and the work we're doing in Portland and will in time do at Skampton. The issues in terms of the setup cost were a combination of not being able to get on site and do all the intrusive surveys that subsequently gave us further information, then a combination of not having all of the right skills in the team at the time to make an accurate assessment and making the assessment that we made very quickly. We have said, and so Matthew has said and Joe has said, we acknowledge we got that number very wrong. Some of that was definitely avoidable at the time. Some of it, I think, less so. Those are all lessons that we have learned in the programme, in the work we've done over the last year. But such that we've now got the programme onto a much stronger
You didn't learn
footing.
them from Napier because there were some set-up problems with Napier, which caused some additional costs.
If I might add, I think if anything, the fact that we'd done Napier led us to assume that we'd have a similar path. These sites are very different. They've housed very different MOD purposes. They're in different parts of the country. For example, Skampton has its own private gas supply, which is proving quite difficult for us and requires different surveys. So I think the MOD sites, one of our big lessons is that they are very different. There have been surprises, there have been unforeseen costs, and they have not been easy to convert because each one is novel in its own right.
You're seriously saying that when Skampton was identified as a potential site, the MOD effectively denied you access?
No, we didn't say they denied us access. We did not do the intrusive surveys before we owned the site.
Why not?
Because we were operating at pace and we felt we had enough information based on the initial surveys.
So pace over value for money at this point. I'm going to bring in Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown, who you might want to declare his interest here, actually.
Yes, I will declare my interest. I am a chartered surveyor. I used to work for the MOD as a chartered surveyor. I then went on to the private sector. And I have to tell you, Mr. Ridley, that all of these sites would have had basic information about the square footage of the buildings or the square meterage of the building, the size and type of gas supply, which you're complaining about now, the size and type of electricity supply you're complaining about now. There are mod drone technologies for doing surveys, which can be done in a matter of hours. Frankly, when I moved from the MOD to the private sector, we were doing complex property transactions of this type where the clients, both purchaser and seller, wanted it within a week. If we had produced this sort of assessment that you've produced here so far adrift, we'd have been sued for negligence.
Have you got anything to say about the MOD's role in this?
The MOD did have information on the basic square footage of the buildings and those sorts of things. Absolutely.
Right. Just move on from the property point of view. And I bet you paid more than £5 million for the lease than anything else. So it was really, the sums just didn't add up at £5 million. But
so, my friends, I get the feeling Sir Bernard Clifton-Brown might have a point there. What do you guys think? So, whose fault would it here then? The government? The witnesses? The Home Office? Or all of the above and then some? Well, let me know what you think down below. But one thing is for certain. You won't have heard the last from this meeting. I have a few videos on this and it's quite interesting. But until then, let me know what you guys think and I shall bid you farewell and take care, my friends.